The Admiral, standing in the middle of foaming dark waters, with only 13 damaged ships, looked at the 333 warships coming towards him and didn't even draw his sword. While his own soldiers waited for death, he was waiting for the current beneath the sea to change direction. The year was 1597. Korea's legendary admiral, Shin, had returned to duty to protect his people, even though he was betrayed and tortured by his own king. But he had only 13 ships left to stand against an entire fleet. Shin refused to fight the enemy in open water. Instead, he lured the massive enemy fleet into a deadly strait called Myeongyang, which was very narrow and where the currents suddenly reversed. When the enemy ships got stuck in the narrow strait, the fierce current suddenly changed direction. The massive fleet began to crash into each other and shatter due to their own weight and the reverse current. With only 13 ships, Shin destroyed the enemy fleet without losing a single ship of his own. He wasn't fighting the enemy. He was fighting the ocean itself. Sometimes, the lack of resources at your disposal doesn't matter. What matters is where you position those resources. Are you focusing on the enemy's numbers, or are you turning the battlefield into your own weapon? A man buried in the snow in -40-degree weather was filling his mouth with snow to hide his breath, because even a split-second cloud of vapor could be his death warrant. The year was 1939. When the massive Soviet army invaded Finland, they faced only a simple farmer named Simo Heiha. Russian snipers used state-of-the-art telescopic sights, but Simo deliberately refused to attach a scope, because the scope glass reflected in the sun and forced him to raise his head higher out of the snow when aiming. This difficult restriction he chose voluntarily actually made him completely invisible in the snow. Using only a simple iron sight, in head-to-head combat, he took down over 500 enemies single-handedly. They called him the White Death. The equipment everyone chases can sometimes be your greatest weakness. What comforts do you have the courage to reject in order to win your own victory?
Even today, touching her notebooks is forbidden. You would need protective gear just to approach her grave, because she was the only woman in history to use her own body as fuel to light the lamp of science. When Marie Curie discovered radium, she didn't know it was deadly. She carried glowing tubes in her pockets and watched them like nightlights. While radiation was destroying her cells, she kept working. She became the first person to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different fields, but she paid a heavy price. When she died, her body was so radioactive that they had to bury her in a lead-lined coffin. Her notebooks will remain deadly for another 1,500 years, but her legacy saved millions of lives. Tell me, what are you willing to sacrifice for what you believe in?
The disheveled man who showed up hours late to face a furious, legendary samurai had only a heavy wooden oar carved from a boat instead of a sword. His opponent thought he had lost his mind and had come there to die. The year was 1612. The invincible swordsman Sasaki Kojiro was waiting for Miyamoto Musashi in Japan's deadliest duel. Kojiro's sword was legendary for its extraordinary length and deadly speed. Musashi knew he couldn't compete with his opponent's fast and elegant sword. So, while riding the boat to the island, he carved an oar into a crude, heavy but colossal wooden weapon. He deliberately arrived late to the duel, infuriating Kojiro and breaking his focus. When Kojiro swung his deadly sword, Musashi dodged by a hair and brought down that heavy mass with a single, unshakable strike upon his opponent. That heavy and crude piece of wood shattered years of elegant technique with a single, crushing blow. Sometimes, you don't need the fastest or sharpest weapon to win. You just need the patience to break your opponent's balance and deliver that single, heavy, colossal strike. Do you bypass obstacles elegantly, or do you crush them with that colossal blow?
Did you know that the man who created the world's greatest melodies couldn't hear a single note? When Beethoven went deaf, he didn't stop playing. He stopped listening and started feeling. When he composed his masterpiece, the Ninth Symphony, the outside world was completely silent to him on the premiere night. Even after the final note was played, he continued to conduct the orchestra because he couldn't hear the thunderous applause of thousands behind him. When a soloist gently turned him around to face the audience, he wept. His silence had turned into the world's loudest ovation. Music is not in the ears, it is in the soul. He created a masterpiece from silence. What is your excuse?
An ordinary man, covered in mud and wearing absolutely no armor, didn't even flinch against an elite knight galloping towards him. Instead of a sword, he held only a colossal, heavy wooden club of superhuman weight. The year was 1302, the Battle of the Golden Spurs. Ordinary farmers and weavers had rebelled against the fastest and most heavily armored elite French knights of the era. They were literally starting from level 1. The peasants had no military training or armor. They couldn't compete with the speed of French swords. So they created incredibly slow but massively heavy clubs they called Gudendach. When the knights charged, the peasants didn't run. They planted their feet in the mud and swung that colossal, clunky mass with all their might. Those invincible steel armors that an elegant sword couldn't even scratch were crushed like paper by a single heavy blow from the giant club. The knight's unshakable stance was shattered in one strike. That day, those men who came to the battlefield from nothing collected exactly 500 golden spurs from the elite knights. You may have started life from the lowest level, with no equipment at all. But if you swing that clunky and heavy burden at the right moment, you can shatter even the most invincible obstacles in one strike. Are you competing with speed, or are you crushing armor with that heavy mass? A Japanese executive sitting in the front row of a massive press conference was waiting to hear his company's historic partnership announced. Instead, he watched his partner betray him in front of the whole world. The year was 1991. Sony and Nintendo had secretly agreed to create a new gaming console together. Sony engineer Ken Kutaragi had poured his soul into this project. But at the Consumer Electronics Show, Nintendo took the stage and announced they were ditching Sony to partner with their biggest rival, Philips. It was an unprecedented corporate humiliation. Sony executives wanted to pull out of the gaming industry completely. But Ken Kutaragi was furious. He convinced the board to build their own standalone console just to destroy Nintendo. That decision for revenge birthed the PlayStation and shattered Nintendo's gaming monopoly forever. The greatest weapons are forged in the fires of the heaviest defeats. When you are betrayed, do you give up? Or do you take that damage and turn it into the strength to clash head-to-head with your enemy? A knight who lost his right arm to a cannonball on the battlefield refused to retire while lying covered in blood. Instead, he had an iron hand made for himself and returned to the front lines far more ruthless than before. The year was 1504. The German mercenary, Götz von Berlichingen, lost his sword-wielding right hand during a siege. At that time, this meant the end of a warrior's life. But Götz broke this rule. He commissioned a mechanical iron hand, driven by incredibly complex springs and gears. Thanks to this prosthesis, he could grasp those massive, heavy swords and axes unshakably once again. By losing his flesh and replacing it with iron, he had actually hardened himself and become far more invincible than before. For 40 years, he continued to fight head-to-head on the absolute front lines. Just his appearance on the battlefield, with that heavy iron hand, broke the enemy's courage, striking fear into them and weakening their strength. He went down in history as the Knight of the Iron Hand. When you take the heaviest damage, can you forge that pain into an iron armor to protect you? When life diminishes you, do you give up, or do you hit harder? The skinny man in the dim studio completely ignored the microphone and stabbed his guitar amplifier with a pencil, tearing the speaker. The world, which was only used to clean and elegant sounds until that day, was not ready for that colossal and dirty sound coming from this torn speaker. The year was 1958. The music industry was monopolized by fast and incredibly elegant singers in suits. Link Wray was a poor musician who couldn't sing because he lost a lung to tuberculosis. He was literally starting life from ground zero. Link knew he couldn't compete with those elegant singers and fast notes, so he rejected clean music. By deliberately tearing his amplifier, he invented that crude, heavy, and colossal distortion sound. In his song called Rumble, instead of playing fast solos, he only struck very slow but massively heavy power chords. This dirty and slow mass was such a heavy blow that, even though it didn't contain a single word, it was banned from radios for fear it would incite youth to crime. Link Wray's slow and heavy strike shattered the poise of the elegant music industry in one blow and gave birth to heavy metal. Your shortcomings may prevent you from playing that fast and elegant game, but when you unleash your own heavy and clunky mass, you write the rules. Are you keeping up with others' elegant game? Or are you resetting everything with that heavy chord? Did you know that history's most life-saving invention was actually a cleaning mistake? Alexander Fleming left his desk messy when he went on vacation. This error changed the world. When he returned from vacation, he saw that his open bacterial culture dishes were moldy. A normal person would have thrown them all away, but he paused before throwing them away and looked closely. That strange mold had shredded all the deadly bacteria around it. If he had washed that dish that day, penicillin would never have been found. And from World War II to today, the 200 million people who would die from infection could not be saved. Perfect plans sometimes do not work. Miracles are hidden inside mistakes. What you think is a failure is perhaps your greatest discovery.
Do you think you need an army to overthrow an empire? Sometimes you just need to sit down. Rosa Parks wasn't physically tired that day. She was just tired of giving in. In 1955, a bus driver ordered her to stand up and give her seat to a white man. Everyone expected her to obey, but she didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just whispered one word: no. That silent no forced an entire city to walk and changed the laws of a nation. Because she sat that day, millions of people can stand tall today. Do you stay silent in the face of injustice, or do you hold your ground?
The massive warrior, standing in the middle of a narrow wooden bridge, looked at the army of thousands rushing towards him and just gripped his axe tighter. Instead of running or taking cover, he chose to fight them all, head to head, one by one. The year was 1066. The English army caught the Vikings completely unprepared and unarmored at Stamford Bridge. The Vikings needed time to regroup and form a shield wall. At that moment, an unnamed giant Viking warrior stepped forward. He had no shield, only a massive axe held with both hands. He knew the English soldiers couldn't surround him on the narrow bridge. He refused to step back, and with incredible resistance, he struck down 40 English soldiers, one by one. While he engaged in this heavy damage trade, his army behind him found the opportunity to regroup. Unable to defeat this invincible giant face to face, the English finally sent a soldier into the river and brought him down by spearing him from beneath the bridge. Sometimes the only way to survive and protect those behind you is not to run, but to absorb the damage and clash head to head. When life comes at you with an army, do you have the poise to hold that bridge?